A devastating wildfire destroyed his home, but it also ignited a story of hope, leadership, and a legacy that's still growing. Marco loved Los Angeles in all its chaotic glory. The city wasn't perfect, traffic could drive a saint mad, and the air always seemed to carry a faint haze, but to Marco, it was home. He had built his life here with Adriana, his high school sweetheart, and their 2 kids, Sophia and Daniel. Their house sat in a modest neighborhood just outside the city, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a small garden where Adriana grew tomatoes and sunflowers. The kids often played tag on the front lawn while Marco worked on his car or grilled carne asada for Sunday dinners. Life wasn't extravagant, but it was good. Stable. That stability was shattered on a scorching September afternoon. The sky darkened in a way that didn't make sense for midday. Marco stepped outside and saw it, a massive plume of smoke rising in the distance. At first it felt like another wildfire far enough away not to worry about. But as the hours passed, the wind shifted, and the distant threat became a terrifying reality. By nightfall, ash rained from the sky like snow, coating their yard in a ghostly gray. Marco turned on the news, his heart sinking with each word from the reporters. Mandatory evacuations, rapidly spreading flames, a growing list of homes lost. When the warning came for their neighborhood, there was no time to think. "Grab the essentials," Marco shouted, trying to stay calm for Adriana and the kids. They scrambled to pack what they could. Family photos, important documents, the kids' favorite toys. As they piled into the car, Sophia clutched a worn, stuffed bear, tears streaming down her face. Driving away, Marco stole one last glance at their home. Flames were already licking the edges of the street, and the heat was suffocating even inside the car. Adriana squeezed his hand tightly, her voice trembling. "We're together. That's all that matters." They spent the night in a crowded evacuation center. Marco barely slept, his mind replaying the chaos over and over. The next morning they got the confirmation they had been dreading. Their home was gone. Everything, the memories, the keepsakes, the place where their kids had grown up, was reduced to ashes. The days that followed were a blur. The kids tried to adapt to their new reality, but Marco saw how it wore on them. Sophia stopped smiling as much, and Daniel clung to Adriana every chance he got. Marco felt like he was failing them, unable to provide the security they needed. Work at Tesla became his one escape. He threw himself into his tasks, hoping the monotony of the assembly line would drown out the noise in his head. He didn't talk much about the fire with his coworkers. It was easier to keep his pain tucked away, hidden behind polite nods and forced smiles. But no matter how hard he tried to move forward, the weight of what they had lost was always there. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the absence of the life they had built. And just when it seemed like the road ahead was impossibly bleak, a single conversation set events in motion that Marco never could have anticipated. Marco had always been the kind of worker who kept his head down and got the job done. At Tesla, he prided himself on his precision and efficiency. Even after losing his home, Marco didn't let his personal struggles affect his work. To him, it was the least he could do. His family needed his paycheck now more than ever. Still, it was impossible to keep his situation completely under wraps. Colleagues started to notice how tired he looked, the shadow of worry in his eyes. A few offered quiet words of sympathy when they overheard him on the phone with Adriana, trying to coordinate temporary shelter for their family. One afternoon, during lunch in the break room, a coworker named Luis asked how Marco was holding up. Marco hesitated, unsure whether to open up, but the genuine concern in Luis's voice broke through his usual wall of silence. "It's tough," Marco admitted, his voice low. "The kids are struggling. Adriana's trying to stay strong, and I just don't know how we're going to rebuild." Unbeknownst to Marco, that conversation was the spark that set the next chapter of his life in motion. Word of his situation spread among his colleagues, eventually reaching a supervisor. They in turn passed the story up the chain. It wasn't long before Marco's plight reached someone far beyond the factory floor, Elon Musk himself. A few days later, Marco was called into the office by his supervisor. His mind raced with possibilities. Had he done something wrong? Was he being let go? The wildfire had left him with no backup plan, and the thought of losing his job made his stomach churn. When he walked into the room, the supervisor handed him a tablet with a video call already in progress. On the screen was Elon Musk. Marco froze, momentarily stunned. He had seen Musk's face in interviews, news articles, and company-wide announcements, but this felt different. The man on the screen wasn't the visionary CEO, he was just a person, looking at Marco with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Marco," Musk said, his tone surprisingly soft, "I've heard about what you and your family have been through. I can't imagine how hard this must be." Marco swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Thank you, sir. We're managing as best we can." Musk nodded thoughtfully. 6 years with Tesla, right?" he asked. "That's a long time. Your work ethic and commitment haven't gone unnoticed." "Thank you," Marco replied, unsure what else to say. Then came the words that left Marco speechless. "I want to help," Musk continued. "We have temporary housing available at one of our facilities. I'd like to offer it to your family, no strings attached. And beyond that, Tesla will cover some of your immediate expenses, food, clothes, whatever you need to get back on your feet." Marco felt a lump rise in his throat. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he managed a hoarse, This is more than I could have ever hoped for. Thank you. Thank you so much." Musk smiled faintly. "You've been part of this company for years, Marco. You're part of the Tesla family. And family takes care of each other." The call ended, but Marco sat in the chair for several minutes, unable to move. Relief, gratitude, and disbelief washed over him in waves. When he told Adriana later that evening, she broke down in tears, her sobs a mix of exhaustion and newfound hope. The next day, Marco and his family moved into the Tesla facility. It wasn't their old home, but it was safe, warm, and filled with a kind of hope they hadn't felt in weeks. The kids ran around exploring the space, their laughter echoing through the halls. For the first time since the wildfire, Marco allowed himself to breathe. But little did Marco know, this act of kindness was only the first step in a journey that would change his life forever. The Tesla facility wasn't just a roof over Marco's head, it became a sanctuary for his family in their time of need. The rooms were modest but comfortable, with enough space for Adriana to create a semblance of home. Sophia and Daniel quickly adapted, their laughter filling the hallways as they raced around with newfound energy. For the first time in weeks, Marco saw the light return to his children's eyes. But for Marco, adjusting wasn't as easy. Though he was grateful, a nagging voice in the back of his mind questioned whether he deserved this generosity. He tried to repay the kindness by throwing himself into his work, often volunteering for overtime or helping less experienced coworkers troubleshoot issues on the line. It wasn't about recognition. It was about earning what had been given to him. One crisp morning, a message from his supervisor interrupted Marco's routine. Elon Musk was coming to visit the factory, and he wanted to meet Marco in person. The news left Marco both nervous and intrigued. Why was Musk taking such an interest in him? When the day arrived, the factory buzzed with a mix of excitement and anticipation. Musk arrived unannounced, dressed in his usual understated manner. Despite the entourage of executives and security around him, he had a casual air as he walked through the factory floor, stopping to greet employees and ask questions about their work. When Musk reached Marco, he extended a hand with a genuine smile. "Marco, good to finally meet you," he said. "Likewise, sir," Marco replied, his voice steady despite the nerves building in his chest. Musk gestured toward a quieter corner of the factory, away from the hum of machinery. "Mind if we chat for a minute?" As they stood near a row of newly assembled vehicles, Musk's tone shifted to something more personal. "I've been following your story since I first heard about what happened to your family. How are they holding up?" Marco hesitated, unsure how much to share. We're doing better. The kids love the space, and Adriana's been amazing through all of this. It's been hard, but we're grateful for everything you've done for us." Musk nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I can't imagine losing everything like that." It's a testament to your strength that you've kept going." Marco wasn't sure how to respond. Compliments like that didn't come often, and he felt the weight of them. "You just do what you have to for your family," he said finally. Musk studied him for a moment, then asked, "What's been the hardest part?" The question caught Marco off guard. He paused, searching for the right words. "It's not just the house," he said slowly. "It's the feeling of being uprooted, like the foundation of everything you've built is just gone." Musk nodded again, his expression softening. "That's what we're trying to prevent. Not just rebuilding structures, but rebuilding lives. Your story reminds me why Tesla exists, not just to innovate, but to help create stability in an unstable world." That conversation marked a turning point. Musk's interest in Marco went beyond sympathy. It felt personal, like he truly wanted to understand. Over the next few weeks, Musk reached out regularly, asking about Marco's family and checking in on their progress. But it didn't stop there. One day, during a factory-wide meeting, Musk introduced a new initiative, Tesla's Wildfire Relief Project. The company would not only provide solar panels and batteries to affected areas, but also work to create sustainable solutions for communities devastated by natural disasters. Marco's name came up during the announcement, much to his surprise. "I've been inspired by Marco's resilience," Musk told the room. "His story reminds us that we have the resources and responsibility to make a difference. I'm asking Marco to help lead this effort, to ensure we're not just fixing things temporarily, but building something lasting." Marco's jaw nearly dropped. Him? Led an initiative? It felt unreal, but the applause from his coworkers told him it was real enough. After the meeting, Musk approached him privately. "I know this might feel overwhelming," Musk said, "but you've already shown what you're capable of. You've lived through this. You know what people need." Marco took a deep breath, the weight of the responsibility settling in. "If this helps people like my family, I'll do everything I can." Musk clapped him on the shoulder with a rare smile. "That's all I ask." And with that, Marco stepped into a role that would challenge him in ways he never imagined, but also give him a purpose greater than he had ever known. Marco's life changed overnight as he stepped into his new role. He was no longer just a line worker at Tesla. Now he was tasked with helping lead an initiative that could change the lives of thousands impacted by wildfires. The magnitude of the responsibility wasn't lost on him, and though he felt out of his depth, he was determined not to let anyone down, especially not his family. The first days were daunting. Marco found himself sitting in rooms full of engineers, designers, and community planners, many of whom had advanced degrees and decades of experience. At first, he questioned whether he belonged there. What could a guy like him, who'd only ever worked on assembly lines, contribute? But Musk had been right. Marco's experience gave him a unique perspective. He didn't just understand the technical side of things, he understood the human side. When the team discussed deploying Tesla's solar panels to disaster areas, Marco was the one to remind them about practical issues, like how hard it is to install equipment when roads are blocked or when survivors have nowhere to sleep. "We need to think about the people on the ground," he told the team during one brainstorming session. "It's not just about power, it's about making sure they feel like they can rebuild." His input became invaluable. Soon, Marco was working side by side with engineers to design mobile units equipped with Tesla batteries and solar panels. These units could power small shelters, charge phones, and even provide refrigeration for food and medicine. Marco insisted on keeping the designs simple and user-friendly, knowing that in a crisis, people didn't have time for complicated setups. As prototypes rolled out, Marco personally traveled to some of the hardest-hit areas to oversee their deployment. One of the first stops was a temporary shelter in Ventura County. When the first unit powered on, lighting up a dimly lit room where families had gathered, Marco watched as children's faces lit up with wonder. Parents thanked him through tears, and for the first time, Marco felt the weight of his efforts paying off. But Marco's vision didn't stop at providing power. He proposed an idea to the team that took Tesla's involvement even further: converting unused Tesla semis into mobile relief stations. These trucks could carry food, water, and medical supplies to areas where infrastructure had been wiped out. Engineers and designers rallied behind the idea, and within weeks, the first fleet of trucks was on the road, bringing aid to places that had felt forgotten. Marco's days were long and exhausting, but they were also the most fulfilling of his life. He spent hours in meetings, evenings on calls with community leaders, and weekends visiting disaster sites. Adriana often worried about him pushing himself too hard, but she also saw the fire in his eyes, the kind of drive she hadn't seen since before the wildfire. "You're making a difference," she told him one night as they sat on the porch of the Tesla facility. "I've never been prouder of you." Her words kept him going, even on the hardest days. And there were plenty of hard days. Some areas were so devastated that even Marco struggled to find hope. He saw families huddled in tents, children who hadn't smiled in weeks, and elderly people who'd lost everything they'd spent a lifetime building. But amidst the devastation, there were glimmers of resilience. Marco met volunteers who worked tirelessly to help strangers, firefighters who stayed on the front lines for weeks, and survivors who shared stories of determination. Those moments reminded him why he'd taken on this role in the first place. As the initiative gained traction, Musk became more involved, often checking in on Marco's progress. During one such meeting, Musk proposed an idea that caught Marco completely off guard. "Marco," Musk said, leaning forward across the table, "I want Tesla to fund a community center in one of the hardest-hit areas. A permanent space where people can come for support, resources, and even hope. And I want you to lead the effort." Marco stared at him, stunned. "A community center?" Musk nodded. "It's not just about immediate relief. It's about rebuilding. We can't replace what people lost, but we can give them a foundation to start again. And you understand that better than anyone." The enormity of the task hit Marco like a tidal wave, but he couldn't say no. "If we can make this happen, it could change lives," he said quietly, the weight of the moment sinking in. Musk smiled faintly. "Then let's make it happen." Marco left the meeting with a mix of excitement and fear. Building a community center was unlike anything he'd ever done. It wasn't just about logistics or technology. It was about creating something that would outlive him, something that would stand as a symbol of resilience for years to come. But as Marco quickly realized, turning this dream into reality would take more than determination. It would take the collective strength of a community ready to rise from the ashes. Marco had never led a project like this before, but something deep inside told him this was his calling. The idea of a community center, a place where people could find hope and resources, felt personal. He couldn't stop thinking about the night he'd fled his home with Adriana and the kids, unsure if they'd ever find stability again. If this center could give someone else a lifeline, it would all be worth it. The location was chosen. A plot of land near Santa Clarita, surrounded by neighborhoods devastated by the wildfire. Marco worked closely with Tesla engineers, architects, and local community leaders to design a space that wasn't just functional, but welcoming. The center would include multi-purpose rooms for counseling and job training, a child care facility, a food pantry, and even a small library. Marco insisted on adding a memorial garden, a quiet place where survivors could reflect and honor what they'd lost. Construction began swiftly, and Marco threw himself into the project. He spent his days coordinating with contractors and volunteers, his evenings reviewing blueprints, and his nights drafting emails to potential donors. The work was grueling, but the progress was undeniable. Walls began to rise where ashes once lay, and soon, the skeleton of the building took shape. Word of the project spread quickly. Local news stations covered the story, highlighting Marco as the driving force behind the initiative. Donations poured in from individuals and businesses alike, many moved by Marco's resilience and determination. Adriana often joked that their mailbox was fuller than it had ever been, overflowing with letters of encouragement and checks from strangers. One morning, as Marco walked the construction site with his youngest, Daniel, the boy tugged on his hand. "Is this where people are going to play, Papa?" he asked, pointing to the area designated for the playroom. Marco crouched down, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "That's right," he said. "Kids like you are going to come here and feel safe again." The thought brought tears to his eyes. He wiped them quickly, not wanting Daniel to see, but the moment stayed with him. As the center began to take shape, more volunteers came forward to help. Local contractors offered their services at discounted rates. Residents who had been displaced pitched in to paint walls and plant trees, and even some Tesla employees drove down on weekends to lend a hand. The site became a hub of activity, buzzing with a sense of purpose that seemed to lift everyone's spirits. Marco also found himself working closely with local families, listening to their stories, and ensuring the center reflected their needs. One woman, an elderly widow named Gloria, shared how she had lost not only her home but the community she'd built over decades. "This center," she told Marco, "isn't just about rebuilding. It's about reminding us that we're not alone." Her words stuck with him, and he often repeated them to his team during the harder days. By the time construction was complete, the center was a beacon of hope rising from the ashes. Its sleek, modern design, a testament to Tesla's innovation, stood in stark contrast to the surrounding ruins. Yet it was warm and inviting, with large windows that let in natural light and walls painted in soft, calming colors. The grand opening was a day Marco would never forget. Hundreds of people gathered under a cloudless sky, the air filled with a mixture of anticipation and celebration. Marco stood on the small stage with Adriana and the kids by his side, his heart pounding as he looked out at the crowd. Survivors, volunteers, and community leaders had all come to witness the moment. Elon Musk joined him on stage, dressed simply as always. He handed Marco an oversized pair of scissors for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Taking the microphone, Musk addressed the crowd. "This center represents more than just a building," he said. "It represents resilience, community, and the power of coming together. And none of this would have been possible without Marco. His story inspired this project, and his leadership made it a reality." Marco felt the weight of those words. As the crowd erupted in applause, he stepped forward, his hands steady despite the rush of emotions. With one clean cut, the ribbon fell and the crowd cheered louder than ever. Inside, the center came alive immediately. Families explored the spaces, children ran to the playroom, and volunteers helped visitors sign up for counseling sessions and job training programs. Marco stood in the middle of it all, taking it in. Adriana squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with tears. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," Marco replied, his voice thick with emotion. But the most powerful moment came when Sophia, his eldest, tugged on his sleeve. "Papa," she said, pointing to a plaque near the entrance. It read, "In honor of all those who lost so much, and for the community that rose together to rebuild." Marco's breath caught. This wasn't just a building, it was a legacy, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. But Marco knew this was only the beginning. The real work, the impact on people's lives was just starting, and he was ready to be there every step of the way. The weeks following the grand opening of the community center were some of the busiest of Marco's life. The center wasn't just a building, it was a lifeline. Families streamed in every day, seeking help with everything from finding housing to securing employment. Children played in the bright, cheerful rooms while their parents attended workshops on rebuilding their lives. Counselors offered support to those struggling with the emotional toll of the disaster, and volunteers kept the food pantry stocked. Marco made it a point to be there as much as possible, not just to oversee operations, but to connect with the people whose lives the center was impacting. One afternoon, as he walked through the main hall, he noticed a teenage boy sitting alone near the library. The boy stared blankly at a stack of unopened books. Marco approached him and sat down. "You okay?" Marco asked gently. The boy shrugged. "We lost everything. I don't even know where to start anymore." Marco nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "It's tough, isn't it? I've been there. When you lose everything, it feels like the ground's been ripped out from under you." The boy glanced at him, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "How'd you get through it?" Marco smiled softly. "One step at a time, and by letting people help me, even when I thought I didn't deserve it. This place? It's here for you, for all of us, to start over. The boy gave a small nod, and for the first time, Marco saw a glimmer of hope in his expression. Moments like these reminded Marco why the center mattered. But it wasn't just about helping others. The center had transformed Marco too. He'd gone from feeling helpless after the wildfire to discovering a strength he didn't know he had. Adriana often reminded him of how much he'd grown. "You've always had a big heart," she told him one night as they sat together on the porch of the Tesla facility. But now, the whole world gets to see it. As news of the center's success spread, Marco's story gained national attention. Journalists visited Santa Clarita to cover the center, sharing its impact with audiences far and wide. Donations continued to pour in, enabling expansions to the facility and funding new programs. Marco was invited to speak at community events, sharing his journey and the lessons he'd learned along the way. He talked about the power of resilience, the importance of community, and the value of compassion. "Sometimes," he told one audience, "we don't realize how much we need each other until everything is taken away. This center isn't just about rebuilding homes, it's about rebuilding hope." One particularly emotional moment came during an event at the center's memorial garden. Survivors gathered to share stories and honor loved ones who hadn't made it through the disaster. Marco listened as Gloria, the elderly widow he'd met during construction, spoke about losing her husband of 50 years in the fire. "This place," she said, her voice trembling, "gave me a reason to keep going. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's light." Hearing her words, Marco felt a lump rise in his throat. He realized that the center wasn't just a symbol of resilience for the community. It was a symbol of resilience for him too. As the months turned into years, the center became a permanent fixture in the community. It expanded to include vocational training programs, mental health services, and even partnerships with local schools. Marco continued to play an active role, mentoring young leaders and ensuring the center stayed true to its mission. One day, Sophia, now a teenager, asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Papa, are you happy?" Marco paused, looking at her thoughtful expression. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I think I am. But it's not the kind of happy I thought I'd have. It's better. It's knowing that what we've been through didn't break us. It made us stronger." As he spoke, Marco realized how true those words were. The wildfire had taken so much from him and his family, but it had also given him a purpose he never imagined. In a quiet moment at the center, Marco stood near the entrance and read the plaque again. "In honor of all those who lost so much, and for the community that rose together to rebuild." He smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of peace. If Marco's story has touched you, remember that every act of kindness, no matter how small, can create ripples that change lives. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience, hope, and inspiration, and share this one with someone who might need it today.